And thanks for having me on here, because that's another reason I was able to get through his diagnosis was I found, which we'll talk about later, I know, but I found other moms going through similar things and they coached me. So and this is how socials are so positive. And as far as content, definitely I love doing the style content, and I love putting together unique outfits, because everyone can buy high end and put it together, right? I mean, if you have the financial means to put something together that's already beautiful, that's one thing, and that's really great. But also, what about a teacher who's financially just average? And how can we put together outfits that look chic on a budget? So I love doing reels that are fun and connective and that have different outfits. I also love funny reels for moms, and those seem to be the ones that do well. My photos, I have a background in some modeling, so I know how to take a decent photo. So those seem to do really, really well. And also my reels that are you can relate to, that are funny. Those do really well. They're fun to make, they're easy to make, and they give people a break from real life. You can laugh.
Well, once again, guys, you can go ahead and follow Sara on her Instagram page. It's just simply at heels. So HEELS, like wearing a set of heels. So
Yeah.
heels and happiness on Instagram. I want to start talking about Jordan's syndrome. Again, I am not familiar with it at all, but segueing into talking about your kids, I know you have 2 sons. Miles is the one that you just recently spoke about, and you kind of got a little bit teary eyed, which understandably so. I want to read a little bit of one of Sara's most recent segments that she just sent me through my Instagram DM. And after reading this, I was kind of taken aback. I'm like, need to get her on the podcast. Like, she's so much more than just a pretty face with a cool blog. Like, she has a full story to tell. So, with this, it's called Belonging, Following a Journey to a Diagnosis. And again, if you want to read this whole blog post, you will find it on runningonheelsandhappiness.com. But again, I just want to read a little bit of it. That way, you guys can have a little bit more backstory on who Sara is, figure out a little bit more about her journey. And then, of course, she will deep dive into what Jordan syndrome is and how exactly she started to figure out that her son has this syndrome. Sara starts off by saying, "So, if you have followed along here, you may already know that I have 2 boys. My oldest, Parker, age 4, and my youngest, Miles, age 3. We went through a great deal of loss and difficulty on our journey to parenthood. However, we would do it all over again to receive these 2 blessings. Our first son came without any issues. If anything, pregnancy and labor were both pretty uneventful and went extremely well. We knew we wanted more children, and Miles was a wonderful surprise that we hoped for, and it truly changed our world. Again, pregnancy and birth with Miles was relatively uneventful and it was natural. However, now looking back, I can see the signs that some things were different. He was very quiet, tired easily, and took a long time to nurse often, falling asleep during the process. We had an outstanding hospital team and care at Tampa General Hospital, and we would return to the same team if we ever choose to expand our family. After being released from the hospital, Miles lost weight rapidly, even as I nursed him constantly and pumped to keep my milk in plentiful supply. I remember one night hysterically crying because he was up every 30 minutes.
Mhm.
My parents stepped in and did feeding shifts to help me because I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, sleep deprived, and hormonally imbalanced. Miles gained weight and seemed to do fairly well, considering, which now makes sense after receiving a diagnosis, because most infants with his syndrome are labeled failure to thrive and use feeding tubes. After 3 months, I knew something may be different, and my pediatrician agreed. So, again, guys, if you want to read the rest of this blog and if you want to learn more about Jordan's syndrome, head to runningonheelsandhappiness.com to get all of the rest of the information. But I just want to hear, Sarah, from your mouth. That sounds extremely difficult.
Yes.
Being a mom, already having one kid where sounds like it was fairly simple. And now
Yes.
you're kind of just hit with a ton of bricks, like, okay, what do I do now? So, how did you start diagnosing this? How did you realize that something was different about Miles?
Well, for one, it's not typical for an infant to feed every 30 minutes. And that's something that you wouldn't see unless something is going wrong. And as that went, when that was something that tipped me off immediately. And as we progressed, he wasn't lifting his head, he tracking. So visually, they're supposed to track at a certain age, and he wasn't tracking. So initially, it's not a diagnosis. He was hypotonic or had a symptom of hypotonia. So I researched that, but that is a symptom of something greater. So if anyone finds that their kid has hypotonia, you want to keep pressing to get a diagnosis, because with the diagnosis, you can get therapies, you can get help, you can get funding for different equipment or anything that your child needs. You can find something to help you. And I just knew that after the feeding was the real tip off to me, because he was so frail and I was feeding him 5 times as much as I fed Parker. And he was strictly, both of them were nursed. And Parker, by 3 months, was a porker, and Miles was a string bean. So that had I had Miles as my first child, I don't know if I would have known.